Hello and welcome to the Read Books, Be Kind podcast, where I, your host, Amy Prokopis, hang out with other authors and bookish people, and we talk about bookish and authorly things. So whether you are listening to us or you are watching us over on YouTube or watching the extended bonus version, which is over on my Patreon, we are glad that you are here. I am super excited this week because this is the very first episode of this podcast where we have a guest, and I am super excited to introduce JJ Otis. JJ resides in Michigan with her loving and supportive husband and their two children. In 1999, she received a bachelor's degree in English with an emphasis on creative writing from Western Michigan University, and she loves reading, listening to music, watching AuthorTube videos, going to the NKOTB concerts with friends, and spending time with family. And in her spare time, she is an active volunteer. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. We'll get all into this particular organization. It's the AFI, or the Aniridia Foundation International. Did I say that correctly, JJ?
It's Aniridia.
Aniridia. Okay, we'll definitely get all into that. I want to talk more about all of your volunteering and how that's influenced your writing, because for our listeners and everything, that is quite a big part of JJ's journey. So she has written, aside from being super involved with that and having a whole book about that, actually, she's also the author of The Divine Witches Duology, which is a YA, a young adult paranormal, kind of a little bit of a romance, I believe, too. There's some elements there. It's perfect for people who enjoy books like Sarah Cannon's, what is it? Shadow Demon Saga. Yes. So I'll turn it over to you, JJ, and let you kind of talk a little bit more about your books and sort of how you got started in the world of writing and your background, because I am just super interested by just that author bio alone and perusing your website, some of the things you've been involved in. So I would love to hear more about that if you would like to share.
Yeah. Where would you like me to start? Because I first did the nonfiction book on Aniridia. I worked on that for about 6 years because it was working with doctors, physicians, researchers, and then also gathering stories from those affected, like parents and actual adults who have Aniridia. I gathered all those. It took a long time, but then the publisher also worked on it for a couple of years. So it took almost 6 years total to publish that book. Yeah, it was published in 2010. And then life happened, and I didn't publish until 2021 is when I published The Dust and Divines.
Wow. So I want to let's start first with exactly what is Aniridia.
Yeah, and Aniridia is, it's a genetic condition, but I didn't inherit it, which means I have a sporadic case. I have what's called a nonsense mutation, and that means basically that there was what's the best way to describe this? There was a miscommunication between the RNA and the DNA, and so my eyes stopped developing in utero. And Aniridia literally means complete or partial absence of the iris. So genetically, I should have blue eyes, but I only have the black pupils, and so I'm very light sensitive.
Okay.
But there's a lot more that goes into it.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
It's pretty complicated because people can have nystagmus, which I have. My eyes move back and forth because they're trying to focus. People can have glaucoma from birth, which, you typically think glaucoma is for old people, but we can have all sorts of different issues.
Oh, wow. So I would imagine that would make like your day-to-day a tad bit different, especially if you're light sensitive, if your eyes are trying to focus throughout the day. I bet working on a computer to write your book would be very different too.
Yeah, these glasses that I'm wearing are actually my computer glasses because they have blue light glare coating on them, and then I also have a very slight prescription just to help make the monitor a little bit clearer. And then I also recently got a eye care monitor, which actually you can control blue light and other things on it, which has been helpful because I was getting a lot of headaches. So
I bet.
Yeah.
I guess they would, I'd never thought about like a whole monitor specifically for that.
Yeah, I didn't hear about it until a YouTuber, Natalia Lee, she's an author tuber, and she also has a Enchanted Ink Publishing. She's an editor, and
Mhm.
she talked about it, and I didn't get it for years because she talked about it like 2, 3 years ago, and I just kept getting headaches, and I'm like, okay, I got to invest in this monitor.
Yeah, I really like her content. It's been a little while since I've watched some of her stuff. I've just been so busy,
Mm-hmm.
But I like you. I also really enjoy the author tube space and hearing about how other people produce their books, which is why I wanted to do this podcast and bring other people with different journeys on. And so you have published that book before. What inspired you specifically to write that book and to publish it, make it public?
The book on Aniridia.
Yeah.
Well, I was about 16 years old, and I was at my ophthalmologist's office, and he said, can I give permission to this family to I need to give your information, like your phone number. Their daughter was just recently diagnosed at 3 months old, which is the age that I was, with Aniridia. And my mom and I said, yeah, sure, we'll talk to him. And the dad came over, and he was very emotional. That's why I'm getting emotional. Yeah, couldn't believe I was in marching band. I played the flute, and he was like watching this VHS tape. That's how old I am. Watching me on marching band. He's like, that's you? You do that? And I was like, yeah. And he said, can I bring my wife back? He was afraid to meet me with his wife because she was very depressed. He brought her back, and we talked, and just talking with them helped them to meet me and to connect. Just like with authors, when we connect, it's so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, there needs to be more information out there, because my parents, all they had in 1976 when I was born was the definition of aniridia. That's all they knew. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't know anything. The doctors couldn't tell them anything. I said, there needs to be something out there. And I thought, I need to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And it took me years to do it. But then when I met Jill, she's the founder and CEO of Aniridia Foundation International. I met her, I connected with her, and I said, hey, this is my idea. She said, yeah, let's do this, because she had all the connections to the physicians and researchers, and it just happened that way. She also helped with the book, so she's a co-author on the book with me.
That's so cool. I think that's awesome that you've kind of filled a space and you were able to help that other family, because if you were the first one to really encounter, have that in your family,
Mm-hmm.
that might sound like, I mean, it could be really heavy. It could sound like a lot. And when you're told that, like, vision impairment and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, sometimes it's hard to see that there's still a lot of potential in life out
Yeah.
there.
And I have vision. It's just not great vision, And when I was very little, one doctor, I think he was actually an intern, didn't really know too much. And he basically said to my parents, oh, she's going to be blind. You might as well just put her in the school for the blind. And he was wrong. He was totally wrong. I actually drove with what's called bioptic glasses. I drove for a little bit, but then it was so stressful that I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. And I know that just from reading about your Divine Witches duology a little bit in those books, I know that you've included a bit of that kind of disability and other impairment rep in those books. So how did the two kind of meet in that journey? How did you go from writing this sort of sciency book about Aniridia and then jump to these paranormal books? How did that journey happen for you?
My daughter was about 3 years old, I think, and I heard this song, and I might sound weird to people who aren't writers, but I just saw this scene in my head. It was like this movie just started in my head, but it was in the middle of the movie, and I had no idea what was going on. And I saw Meg, and I saw Landon, and I was like, okay, there's something going on here. And I just started daydreaming, basically, of, okay, what is this story? And it just progressed. And at first I was like, I don't want to do witches or vampires. No, I don't have to make a magic system. And then I ended up making a very complicated magic system with
Right.
crystals. With my husband's help, he actually gave me the idea a little bit. So it just progressed like that. And then I've been dealing with anxiety probably since I was about 10 years old, because I was bullied all the way through school. And I've never really been on medication. I've always been able to deal with it myself, but I've always had it. And I was like, I want to have a little bit of representation of anxiety. And so I gave Meg anxiety, and she had a little bit of the PSD because she was in a car accident. And then in my newer books, I definitely decided to have my main character, Nori, be visually impaired and have aniridia so I could show people that.
Right. I think it's so important to show that depth in character. And I think that's really cool how the story kind of came to you through other mediums, because that's so much how I get a lot of my inspiration from, especially being in nature, especially the more fantasy-esque books.
Mm-hmm.
So less of the urban fantasy, but like the one I'm working on now is very much ingrained in, you were talking about creating a whole magic system and that world building being really tedious. And I find myself getting a lot of that kind of inspiration from nature. But music definitely plays a big part for me as well, especially in my more urban fantasies, similar to your book. I have a trilogy that is a bit similar. My Guardians of the Sixth Gate is similar to your duology in some ways. And there's a lot of anxiety rep and stuff in my books as well. So I feel a lot of connection in that sense. And I think it's so important to show that characters are more than just the story you're telling, and that strength can come through adversity, personal adversity, not just in what they're dealing with in the plots, but also what they personally carry and maybe have to overcome or make up for. So I think it's great that you've shown that in that depth in your characters. So I want to hear more about what your stories are about. Tell me about the Divine Witches duology a little more, and your newer project, of course. But I want to learn what exactly these stories are about. And I'm sure everybody listening would love to hear as well, because I'm intrigued already, just you talking about those specific people. So what is that story about?
Well, Meg discovers that she's a witch. She didn't know that she was a witch, and she has to move to a new town. So she's new in town. It's a small seaside town that I made up. It's near Boston. I chose Boston because I lived in Boston. Well, I lived in the Boston area for a very short time after college, but and I wanted to be seaside. I just had this vision in my head of having a seaside town, and I love small towns. I'm from a small town. So she goes to Port Paxton, and she meets, well, first she has a vision, and she doesn't know what's going on. She thinks she's going a little bit crazy because she doesn't know what's going on. She also has a symbol appear on her arm. She meets Landon, and then she thinks, because of the vision, that she's supposed to help him, and this whole mystery of finding out how she's supposed to help him kind of goes throughout the book. But there's also the antagonist is coming into her dreams. I describe it as a parasitic phantom that can go into her dreams and basically torture her in a way. It's not graphic. There's really not a lot of gore in my books. I can't do horror. So the antagonist does that, but then she finds out that the antagonist is called a Torvin, and he isn't a host, and they have to figure out who the host is before he gets to them.
I love that piece about they have to figure out who the host is.
Yeah, it's like someone was like one of their friends in their group. They have to figure out which one of them is this thing.
That is so cool. So he's in one of their friends or somebody around them's body, but he's coming into her dreams and her visions.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is so cool. And it's so it's a duology, so there are two books. What are the titles of those books?
They're right up here, the Destined Divines and the United Divines. The United Divines, they go into a alternate city of Boston. It's called Dark Boston. And that's where like their ancestors basically ran to because of persecution.
I do have to say, when I was looking at your website, the covers for those books are really pretty.
Yeah, I met artist. Her name's Ingrid, and she's Arctic Paintbrush or Arctic. Oh shoot, I can't remember her handle, but she's from Norway and she's an artist. And I said, hey, I have this specific vision for the cover. Could you help me out? I need an artist, and she helped me out. So.
Oh my goodness, I just love the colors. So for those of you that are listening, if you haven't gone and checked out her books or her website, they are on various platforms. I know that you have them on Amazon. So if you would like to, you should definitely go and check them out because for one, I think the story sounds amazing. And also just check out these beautiful colors. They're like purples, they're sort of like dark. They're just really, really pretty. So I just wanted to let you know that I think your artist did a fantastic job.
Yeah, it took a while because I said I want daytime and nighttime to kind of converge, I wanted
Mhm.
them side by side and kind of converge a little bit. And it took a little while to get, but we did it.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
on that's on the first book, Dust and Divines.
Well, I think they're gorgeous. So what are you working on now? I know you were talking a little bit about your newer stuff.
Hmm.
I want to hear about that because for those of you watching and listening, JJ and we have been talking for a little while. We have kind of a thread going with some other authors. And so I have already seen some sneak peeks
Yeah.
into some of her projects. And so I would like to know more about those. If you're ready to share those anyway, JJ, I know that
Yeah.
some people like to, we like to hold on to some things until the
Yeah.
time is right. But if you have anything to share about some of those projects, I know and I'm sure the listeners would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. My new duology is called Order of the Shadows. The first book is called Secret Shadows. Let's see if I can remember a pitch to it. Nori, the main character, is visually impaired. She's a freshman in college, and she has to solve her sister's murder by joining a supernatural secret society to figure out what happened to her sister. And there's demons, there's vampires, just all sorts of paranormal, supernatural beings in it.
Oh, I love that. Is this more of a new adult book since she's college age, or is it still kind of on the cusp?
I want to say it's on the cusp because
Mhm.
I don't want to say new adult because I know a lot of people expect spice, but
Right.
it's no spice really.
Okay.
There's slow burn. He falls first, but she's like 18, and
Okay.
he's like the love interest is like 19, 20, something like that.
I love, love, love a good slow burn. That is what I tend to, when I write romance, that's what I tend to write
Hmm.
is more of a slow burn. I just really
Yeah.
like getting all those. I want to know all the things before like we lead up to the big romance.
Hmm.
And so I just really enjoy that. And the tension is
Hmm.
amazing. And so I can just imagine what this is like, especially as she's trying to uncover this murder.
Hmm.
I think that's so cool. What
Yeah,
is your favorite thing?
he doesn't want her to be in the order, so he's like trying to protect her, saying no, don't be in an order. So they kind of clash at first. They clash
Oh,
and they don't get along too well at first, and then by the end of the book,
there's yeah, so there's lots of tension.
yeah,
I like that. What is your favorite thing to write?
gosh.
Or
Sometimes I like action scenes or battle scenes. It really depends. Like, in the Dust and Divines, there's a huge long scene of a magical battle. It was complicated because I had a lot of characters to keep track of, but I
oh yeah.
enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing that. I like putting in little hints here and there. That's why I always have a little bit of a mystery in my books because I love mystery. So I always like to try and see if people can figure it out because I tend to figure things out in books.
I love that too. I've actually grown to really enjoy kind of what you were talking about, like putting Easter eggs in my books.
Hmm.
I love to write a series. That's probably my bread and butter is writing a series. But I do have kind of a lighter, more romance forward fantasy, and it's an interconnected series. So you could read them in any order, but there are definitely Easter eggs throughout to the others.
Hmm.
To sort of love that kind of aspect, not so much of mystery because they're not mine are not mystery books, but I could see how that would be really fun. And you'd have to be really particular about what piece you put where
Hmm.
and when you reveal things. And so I think there's definitely like a talent to doing that. So kudos to you because I think it's really hard to do that well.
Oh, this book is, yeah, I wasn't going to do a developmental editor this time, but then I thought, I'm really struggling with this mystery because some of my beta readers were like, I don't think she's active enough. And so I did make her more active. But then I was like, I'm still having issues because I'm like, I don't know if I'm telling this too soon or, these little hints because I have journal entries throughout the book. If anyone's ever read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, there's these little
Mm-hmm.
tiny snippets of I think it's called a Lethe Diaries,
Mm-hmm.
and mine are longer, they're more like informative, like information on vampires, werewolves, and the Guardian is a specific thing in my book. The Guild of Power, which is specific to my story. There's informational things, and so I was like, I'm trying to like put little seeds places in these some of the journal entries from her sister, but I don't want to give things away too soon. So I needed someone to go through and go, okay, yeah, this is too soon, or maybe you should move this here. And so she helped me out with that.
Yeah. Are you this is the classic question, isn't it, for writers? But I think you're talking about like the writing process and the developmental edits and all of the pieces in between that go into really crafting a great story for people who don't maybe write. There's a lot of detailed work that goes in, and sometimes it's not so solitary, like JJ's talking about with beta readers and editors and such. So I was just curious more about your process, because I love to learn about that from other authors. I take tools all the time and steal things from other authors for my own process that sometimes work for me and sometimes don't work for me. So how would you describe you? Are you more of a pantser? Are you a plotter? Do you fall in between somewhere?
I think I fall in between. I mean, when I first outlined The Destined Divines, I was definitely a plotter. I outlined the whole thing and then I finished it within 3 months. But then there was all these like plot holes. I'm like, uh-oh. So I had to step back from it for a little bit to figure out all of that. But yeah, I'm in between. I say what are they called?
I think so. Yeah.
I have one doc when I start a project, and I got this idea from Brittany Wang. I start a project and I do a story Bible, and I use the headers in Word so it's more organized, so I can have plot outline or just brainstorming outline, character profiles. Everything's all in one document. Even like magic system, world building. It's all right there. And I do outline, but I wish I could be more of a detailed outliner because I think that would help me draft faster and easier. Because when I give it to like my critique partner, she'd be like, "Oh, I think you need to work on this." So it's like I have to go back and forth so many times sometimes, almost like a pantser, because I think of things as I write or later after I draft. So my process is a bit of a mess sometimes, especially with my very first book. So.
I think our first books are always a bit of a, discovery as we go. I think a lot of authors would say that. My process is very similar to that, actually. And it's funny that you talked about Story Bible, because I think in the last maybe couple of years, especially on AuthorTube, since we both consume a lot of content there, and I'm sure those of you who are watching here on YouTube are probably heavily involved in that community as well. I think in the last couple of years, the Story Bible became quite a talked about topic there. Specifically, there were a lot of videos that popped up on how-tos, and I know Sarah Cannon did one, I think not super long ago, that was super detailed. And it's funny because I organize in Word the same way that you do with the headers and everything, and I create the Story Bible, and I didn't ever think about it as being a Story Bible until I think I saw that first, and it was probably Sarah's, first video on YouTube calling it a Story Bible, and I went, what the heck is this? And I thought about it and went, that makes a lot of sense. And so since I saw that, and I've talked to other authors like you who call it a Story Bible and use that kind of a method, I've actually incorporated more of that into my system as well. And that paired with, I outline the same way. I'm outlined very loosely. Use, I think it's Dan Brown's method. I use a 7-point plot method. And so I just call it a skeleton. And so I have those 7 points. I write in little description. Each point has a different, like a hook. They call it a pinch point where things get tense again. And then you'll resolve some of that tension in a different point. And my outlines are usually on one page. They're very, very loose. And then I plan in my outline places where I just know, because I just know the way I write, that I know I'm going to riff a little bit and kind of discovery right as I go. And so I try to anticipate that. So that is my kind of version of trying to outline. So I definitely fall in that planter camp also. So it's funny how I think it's funny how in some ways, if left to our own devices, we kind of develop the same systems. But they're still our own, I think.
Yeah, and I use the Save the Cat Writes a Novel
Oh, yeah.
beats, and that's my skeletal outline, like you called it. But then I've recently been trying to go chapter by chapter, like, okay, what is going to happen this chapter? How am I going to open the book? Because the opening is so important. You have to hook the reader. So I concentrate on that. In this, I'm actually outlining book 2 of Order of the Shadows, and I'm trying to kind of go backwards because I have the beginning and I have the idea of the end. So I'm trying to go backwards a little bit so I can kind of meet them in the middle and figure out, okay, and I know the midpoint, but I'm trying to like that fun and games spot between in the second act. I'm trying to figure that out. So I'm trying to get there.
Sometimes being kind of a planter, sometimes I actually do the discovery writing part separately. And so they're like when I moved out of more of the young adult space this year to new adult, I actually have the book with me. Funnily enough, Curse of Wings and Darkness, my more steamier vampire romance. I was kind of inspired similarly to how you talked about your duology, how you heard a song and it inspired the scene and you could see these two people interacting. I was listening to, I think I was just on YouTube and I came across, I think it was kind of like a club mix. It was one of those, if you're on YouTube in the AuthorTube space, you've probably seen it. It was one of those where the title was something along the lines of like enemies to lovers or you're falling in love with the villain, those kinds of writing mixes. And I was just intrigued because I'd been wanting to write a vampire book and I knew I wanted to do a vampire book and I knew I wanted to do more of a steamy, spicier book. And I thought vampires would be perfect for that, just with the mythology and the Gothic history that is like the vampire story. And I wanted to do a take on that because I had read Serpent and the Wings of Night and I loved it because what I loved about that by Chris Broadbent, Serpent and the Wings of Night, was that it was a steamy vampire romance, but the vampires were still very much in the gray area. They were still feasting on humans. They were very much that original vampire story. And I wanted to write a vampire story where the vampires truly were like, these are not great people. They don't do great things. They're vampires. So I was inspired by that. And then I heard this collection of songs and it was sort of like a club-esque mix. It sounded a little like something you might hear in a club, deep bass, and the image came to me. I had my college girl, very anxious, has anxiety, has been through this really past terrible trauma, and her friend convinces her to go out to the club and she runs into some trouble. There's this man there. He's some kind of a monster. When I originally envisioned him, there's just something about him that was not great. And he ends up getting her into a position where she's in some deep trouble. And this winged creature comes out of the night to save her from this terrible club experience, drops her back off at home, and watches her sleep all night to know that she's safe because she had ingested some drugs that potentially could not have been safe for her. So he makes sure she's safe. And then they wake up the next morning. She learns very, very little and he leaves. But she's left thinking about him in this encounter. And that became really the very first scene I ever wrote, which was between book chapter 1 and 2 of this book. Just was a scene that I just felt compelled to write. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't have any kind of clue where it fell within the bigger story. I hadn't outlined at this point, but the pantser in me needed to sit down and write it. And so I did. And just how you kind of were inspired to write your story from that. I think there's something to be said for allowing creativity to just occur and to happen and then discover it later, how it all fits together.
Yeah. Yeah. And whenever I think of vampires, I think the author that actually really inspired me was Anne Rice.
Yeah.
That's how the first time I ever read vampires was Anne Rice. I also read some of her other books, which were really good, but she just really inspired me because she could really put you into a world. She could put you in ancient Egypt or ancient Rome, and felt like you were there. And so she really inspired me when I was younger.
I drew elements for sure of inspiration from especially Interview with the Vampire and her entire Lestat world. I loved those books. And my favorite thing about Anne Rice, I mean, I think a lot of people know her so well as like a horror writer and such, but she has such a talent for writing villains as main characters that you cheer for. They're truly villains. However, you still find yourself intrigued and compelled to like feel for them. And I just think that's one of my favorite things to write in general are villains, because I come from a psychology background, and I just love the psychology of what drives people to do villainous things. I just think it's so interesting. And I think that's where you get those added layers that keep people reading and keep them invested and interested in the story.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah.
So is that what you're writing right now? Is your new this new duology with your college character?
Yeah. Secret Shadows is actually going to be released in January 2025. My cover's pretty much complete. I got to get it still from the designer, but so I'm going to do a cover reveal soon in December, and then I'll be looking for ARC readers and then releasing it in probably mid or late January.
Ooh, that is so exciting. I will say to our listeners and our watchers and everything, I have seen a version of this cover. I love it. And I think you guys will too. It is so exciting. It definitely embodies some of your earlier work. Some of those beautiful colors and stuff, I think definitely come through in those covers. So I am excited for that cover reveal. And for all of you listening and watching, I'll make sure to put all of the links for JJ Otis and her works in the show notes and in the description box here on YouTube. So definitely go and check that out so you can keep in the loop, especially so that you can catch that cover reveal. And if you're interested in being an ARC reader, I don't know how do you decide and gather ARC readers for your work, JJ?
Right now, I do my newsletter. Basically, I give them first dibs, and I give them a link to a form to sign up, and then I post on social media, which I'm going to do soon. And I was debating about doing an ARC service this time. You know, if I don't find too many, I was debating about that. So it really depends on how many I find after I post on social media.
I've always wondered about, I've never used an ARC service, but I've always wondered, they can do a little more than just collect ARC readers, right?
I'm not really sure. I still need to do more research. Yeah. There's so many out there, really. I mean,
there are.
I don't even know how to decide.
Well, maybe that's something that we can learn together and we can share more information on that, because that is something I have wondered more about, some of those services out there, because there's also, because as indie authors, sometimes it can feel lonely and it feels like we're producing everything ourselves, and we are, but you're talking about services, and there are other services that can work with you. So like those ARC services, and there are PR companies out there that a lot of authors, like some of those really big indie authors that you hear about that are still indie authors, they're still self-publishing, but they have these books out in really big places and in more traditional avenues. And so many of them are doing them through those other third-party services like PR people and stuff. And so maybe that's something that we should explore more on my YouTube channel, and we can share more information. And maybe I'll share more of that as I learn too. So there's definitely places out there to work with. So I think that's really cool. So as far as people connecting with you, so these people that are listening now, watching now on YouTube, if they want to connect with you, how is the best way for them to get connected with you and follow your journey through authordom?
I have a website. It's just jjotis.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there. I'm also on Instagram the most. I'm on TikTok, but I'm mostly on Instagram, and that's author JJ Otis. So I think that's pretty much it. I am on Facebook, but I really don't post to Facebook like I should, because I don't think that's where a lot of readers are right now. So I don't really concentrate on Facebook.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll definitely leave those links below. So if you didn't take all your notes just now as we were talking, I will have everything in the show notes in the description box. So you can just go and click it and you can follow and get connected with JJ Otis. I know I am a newsletter subscriber, and so you guys should be too. So make sure you go. It's right there on her website. You just type in your email and you can get all of the updates. So make sure to do that. Next, because you are our first guest,
Yeah.
and I do have all kinds of things planned for future episodes. I have a lot of really fun authors planned to come on after. I'm excited that you are our very first one, though, JJ. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
I do have a game I thought would be really fun to play. If you listening and watching, if you are on especially Bookstagram, I think this was something that came through Instagram several months ago. It's been a while, and I thought I would bring it back because I have tried my best to revamp it for us authors out here. So we are going to go through and play bookish/author. Never have I ever. So I have a couple questions. We'll see how many that we can get through. I do have a really long list compiled. So if you guys enjoy this, listening and watching, then let me know, because we can definitely bring this game back for other episodes as well. So we'll see how many of these we can get through and have some fun chatting about. All right.
Okay.
So here's the first one. Never have I ever dropped a book on my face while reading. I don't know if you're a read in bed kind of gal or not.
When I was younger, I could read physical books. Now I read ebooks or audiobooks. I have dropped one, yeah. When I was younger, I think so, yeah.
I haven't
I actually dropped an iPad on my face once too, so.
I was going to say, I've never dropped an actual book on my face, but I also do ebooks. And before I got my Kindle, I actually recently got a Kindle. I don't know why it took me so long, but I used to read on my phone from the Kindle app.
Mm-hmm.
And if I couldn't sleep, I'd be laying in bed in the dark, scrolling my phone. And rather than just doom scroll on social media, I would read the Kindle app. And I definitely have dropped my phone on my face many a times. Okay, the next question is, never have I ever hid a book that I was reading or writing. Have you ever kept it secret? This was an interesting one. I had to really think about this. I definitely, when it was at its heyday, and I would say it was kind of my introduction to more spicier books, I definitely read the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, and I did not tell. I mean, at that time I was pretty hush hush about that stuff. So I definitely did not tell anyone when I read those books.
Funny story. You know, that book was so huge, 50 Shades of Grey, and I kept saying on social media, I said, what is it about? I mean, what's so great about this book? And nobody would tell me. And I couldn't, when I went on I had at the time I had a Nook, but I couldn't read the description because it was so tiny. And I was like, what is this? It sounds boring. What is this book about? And I started reading it, and I got to a certain point and went, that's why. I had no idea. No idea.
Oh my goodness.
And I only read the first book because I honestly couldn't stand the characters. I'm sorry.
It wasn't for you?
No, it just wasn't for me.
That's one thing about reading in general is one book will be somebody's favorite book in the world, and it may be somebody else's most hated book. It might be their DNF. Who knows? But I definitely did not tell people when I first was reading through 50 Shades of Grey. I did actually get connected to E.L. James at one point online, and I did have kind of a lovely conversation via email with her. That was before she blew up.
Mm-hmm.
Because at one point she was answering all her own emails. And so I did have a lovely conversation with her. And I think her journey was really interesting because I don't think she either anticipated anyone knowing. Speaking of, have you ever hidden a book or anything you were writing? I don't think she ever anticipated that book being known. So the next question, have you ever, speaking of books you like and didn't like, have you ever DNF'd a book or a project you were working on?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I would say so. Me too. I don't talk about the books that I DNF. And when I don't finish a book, it's simply because it's just not for me. Mm-hmm. It's just something that it's not a topic that's usually interesting to me, or I'm not engaged with it. It's never because it's not a good book, I would say. Mm-hmm. I think there's a book out there for everybody. And that's kind of how it works when I write books too. I've definitely started projects and gone, this is just not the time to write this book. It's usually just not the time. Not necessarily that the book's not right. It's usually a timing thing for me. Never have I ever had a dream about a book boyfriend. I thought that was a funny question.
No, I don't have a book boyfriend. I don't get attached
Yeah.
to male characters.
Have you ever had a little off topic from that question, but have your characters ever entered your dreams?
I don't remember.
I don't know. I don't always remember what I dream about, but I have had dreams where I've been in my settings before in my books, and those are very strange. I think that happens when I'm doing a ton of drafting. When I've been writing really long hours, I'll dream about being within the Shadowlands or one of my settings.
Yeah, I mean, I've had dreams going, and then I wake up and like, ooh, that would make a great story, and then it disappears, and I'm like, what was it about?
That's the worst. Oh, that's the worst. I have some of my best ideas like that late at night or in the shower. Where you are in a place to write them down. I have many notes on my phone, just random things I've written down, and occasionally I'll forget to come back to them and find them later. What in the world?
Yeah.
What's this about?
Yeah.
Never have I ever liked the movie more than the book.
Actually, I read all the Boys That I Love. I actually enjoy the Netflix series better. I mean,
Really?
I like the books, but I think it's mainly the actors really bringing it to life. Yeah.
They did a really good job with that. I think at first when I read this question, I thought I had to think through I was thinking just movies specifically. And I thought, no, I always liked the book better than the movie. And then I thought about it, and I think a lot of us forget that The Vampire Diaries was a book series. And so for me, I did like the Vampire Diaries series better than the books. I know that they're very different. They're almost two completely different stories. And so it's kind of hard to compare those two. But I would say for me that the Vampire Diaries might be liked the movie more than the book. What about this one? Never have I ever cried while reading or writing.
Both.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've cried writing and I've cried reading, yeah.
How often do you get emotional when writing to that kind of degree?
The first time I probably cried is when I had to take out a character that I really loved. I mean, he was a great character, but he just wasn't serving the story.
Right.
So I had to take him out. But then I kind of made him a different character in the sequel. And then when I had to kill off some characters that I really, really liked, I was like, I don't want to do this. But my editor's like, I think it'd be better if you kill at least one of them. And I ended up killing two of them. So I'm like, what am I going to do with this character if this character's dead because they're together?
No.
I was like, I might as well just kill them both.
No.
Because in the second book, I was like, what is he going to do? He's going to be like depressed and not do anything. I'm not going to be able to do anything with this character. So it was sad.
I had that same. It's funny because this story embodies a little bit of what we've just talked about with these questions, but I have a series actually that I think I've rewritten this. It's like it was a 6-book series, went down to a 4-book series, and I think I've rewritten it 3 different times. It was my very first finished book that I ever wrote. I was about 12 years old, and it became a series. And so it was what I had worked on and built all of my skills on as an author and a writer from childhood. It took me through my teen years, early adolescence, into my college age, my early 20s, I would say. I was still working on this book. And it's one of those, we talk about sometimes like the timing's not right for a book. And this is one of those books. I love this series in a very different way than my others because I grew up with it and I grew up with these characters. And so I'm emotionally attached differently to them. But I just think the timing's not right to release it. So maybe eventually I'll come back to it and release it. Or maybe this will be a series that's just near and dear to me only, and it's just for me, which would also be okay. But I also had to off a character, and there's a lot of characters in this book that get the axe, so to speak. But I had to off one in particular, and I remember writing in my college dorm room, writing this scene. It was late at night. It was, I think, finals week. And I wrote this chapter and some of the other subsequent chapters to go along with the death. and I just sobbed, like ugly, like full on ugly cried, red on the face, your eyes hurt afterwards. I just sobbed about this character I wrote. And so I know from the outside, from the outside, my poor roommate and anyone else who had probably come over thought that I had been broken up with or something horrible had happened, you know, but no, it's just this fictional thing inside my brain that I'm crying about.
Yeah.
So I definitely have cried while reading and writing for sure. We're actually getting through a lot of this list. So because we're getting close, I'm going to go ahead and there's only one more left. So the last question that I have, never have I ever based a character in my book off of someone that I know in real life. Have you ever done that?
Sort of. I mean, I took like little bits of someone that I knew, and he's actually a favorite character in my Divine Witches duology. A lot of readers are like, I love him. He's my favorite. He's my husband.
Oh my goodness.
So I took inspiration and took little bits and pieces of one of my friends from college. Because I wanted to show that a guy and a girl can be just friends and not romantic.
Right.
Gage and Meg are just friends, but a lot of my readers actually ship them. So
I think I really like that in books also, where there's a male and a female character that are really close, but it never becomes that kind of a relationship. I think a lot of times the tendency is just in society in general for us to, to put people together like that, like, oh, girls and guys can't be friends. But I think it's just a different kind of relationship, And I think those are super important for us to have in our own lives. And I think it's really important to show that also. So I love that. That's really cool. I do that a lot where I'll base characters around people I know or certain elements. Like I have some characters that'll do things in my book and I go, oh, that's definitely a Matt thing. Matt would do that. I will say I did when I had the idea for Winter Witches, which is my interconnected series. That's much more of a fluffy romance than a deep fantasy book. I had just envisioned this really fluffy romance and I had a hard time wrapping my head around it at first because I'm not that kind of a person. Romance to me is not like your classic show, like outward show, public show of affection. Mm-hmm. What I personally like in my personal relationships, like with my husband, my love language is much more about quality time and the low key things. Like we don't do a lot of gift giving, but we do a lot of nice words and nice things for each other. And so this book was definitely more of like your classic romance. And I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. And so in order to get into the right headspace for Madison Sinclair, I based a lot of her personality off of my own sister. And I think it got more so as I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. And so when I actually finished it, I did dedicate it to her. So I plan on having her on my podcast. If you are a Patreon member, speaking of Patreon, all the extended versions of this podcast, the extended version goes onto my Patreon. So if you are a Patreon member, you get to see all of the fun behind the scenes and extended information from all of these episodes. So go check that out. It's $5 a month to get access to that and more. But I have actually already featured her on a test version of this podcast. And I do plan on having my sister back on to talk about our childhood and growing up together and being so different in that book specifically, because she was a huge inspiration. I would say she's the only person, though, that I've based most of a character around. I don't do that very often. Yeah. Okay, so that is the end of our Never Have I Ever segment. If you guys watching and listening really enjoyed that, let me know, because there are a lot more questions I found, and we can bring that one back with future guests as well. But I want to move on to the next segment, which is a segment we do in every single one of these episodes, and it is my favorite activity. I try to do it daily, and I'm very intentional about at least doing it weekly. So this is the segment where we ask ourselves to find more joy in life and to reflect on the things that are bringing us joy right now in the present. So recently, what has brought me a lot of joy in my life has been connecting with other authors like JJ Otis and some other people, especially on Instagram. People have responded to some of my posts and I've decided to reach out to them more and get to know them. So I am finding a lot of joy in connecting with other people, especially authors right now. So What about you, JJ? What has brought you more joy recently?
Similar to you, because of Sarah matching me with the mastermind group, just meeting different authors. In the beginning, I met a lot of different authors on Instagram and YouTube and really connected. But then, as our careers go on, we kind of almost grow apart like you do with friends sometimes. You're not as connected sometimes. And so getting to know more new authors has been really great. So that's been really fun. And it's helped me just become more active on social media a little bit more because social media has been really difficult for me lately. So
Everyone
this
go
inspired
follow
me.
Everyone go follow JJ on Instagram right now. Go find her social media accounts and show her some love. Social media is really hard, I think especially for us authors, because I would say most of us, this is a community where most of us are introverts.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe I'm wrong. Not all of us are, but
Yeah.
I think as readers and writers, we tend to be a little bit more solitary.
Mm-hmm.
And writing is something you kind of do by yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think, especially social media, you have to put yourself out there to be on social media. You have to post something. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of second nature for a lot of us. So I think a lot of authors struggle with that. And I think it would be fun for this podcast, especially to bring somebody on, not so much author wise, but maybe like an influencer in the
Mm-hmm.
book space to talk more about having a presence on social media. So if you guys listening and watching have ideas, share your favorite book influencers with me. Put them in the comments. Go to the comment section right now and leave names of some people you'd like to see on this podcast more, because I think that's a really big area for a lot of us. So I agree. Connecting with other people is super helpful, and it's definitely helped me thrive as an author. And so I am very thankful, like you were talking about with Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you listening and watching, I met JJ Otis through Sarah Cannon's Publish and Thrive course, which is one I've talked about a little bit on my YouTube channel. I highly recommend it, especially if you are just getting started, if you are a little baby author and you don't exactly know where to start. She teaches this class from like your day one as an author. So if you're just getting started, it's a great way to set get your footing and set the groundwork. And it is also a wonderful place to meet other authors, because she has created a place for us to have community. And so that is where JJ and I got connected, and I am very happy for that. And I am also finding a lot of community in that place, and it's bringing me a lot of joy. It's bringing a lot to my author life. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a really big asset for me. Okay. So our time is coming to a close. I am so glad that you were able to join me and we could make this happen, JJ. I've adored chatting with you and getting to know you, especially through our group chats and everything outside of this podcast. So if you are not a Patreon member, so you guys listening, you definitely should be, because like I said a minute ago, I post all kinds of early things there. So early announcements for my books, insider information, sneak peeks. I just shared the blurb for Snow at Sunset, which is my Christmassy book. I shared the blurb there. I also shared the release date in the pre-order information, which is coming very soon. So my Patreon, I put all kinds of behind the scenes things in there and how-tos. I just released my publishing timeline, how I put together my entire planner and schedule a whole year out. So I have a guide there if you're interested in learning how I do that, and maybe you need a format for yourself. It's only $3 there. But if you're a Patreon member, for $5 a month, you get all of that and more. So go find Patreon in the description box. Check out the extended edition of this podcast, where I will be reading chapters 6 and 7 from, where is it? Curse of Wings and Darkness. So in the earlier episodes, we've started reading from my spicy vampire romance, and I've been giving inside, behind the scenes information about how I wrote this book chapter by chapter as we go. So if that sounds interesting to you, the extended version of this podcast is chapters 6 and 7. So that is my little plug there. JJ, is there anything else you would like to share with people listening about you? Just share in general, impart some kind of wisdom. I don't know where they can follow and find you.
Just being visually impaired is really difficult in life in general. But being an author, visually impaired, and putting yourself out there on social media makes it even more difficult because one, you can't see certain apps very well, like TikTok. I do try to do it on my computer, but just doing a TikTok on my phone can be difficult because, there's so many different
The little buttons and
the little buttons and, like finding how to do transitions or special effects. I don't know. I don't do that because I can't see it, but just being a visually impaired person, I know a lot of people out there, especially on TikTok, there's a section on TikTok called Blind Talk, talking about how, if you meet someone who's blind, please be respectful and don't jump over their cane, or, you know, if
yeah.
they need help, they'll ask for help. Like, I don't use a cane, but if I need help, I ask for help. The same thing goes for someone who uses a cane or a guide dog. If they need help, they'll ask you. So just treat them with respect and not like they're an alien with something.
Right. I think that's great. I definitely think it's important to be mindful of other people and other abilities. So
Mhm.
I love that. Thank you so,
Yeah.
so much for sharing that and sharing about your books and your process. I think that has been amazing. And I definitely, you mentioned a couple resources and some people I definitely am going to go and look up later. So
Mhm.
thank you for that. I learned
Yeah.
so much through this podcast series, and I hope you guys listening and watching are finding value in it as well. So thank you so much for listening or watching today and hanging out with us on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, I love to hear from all of you. So make sure you leave a comment below. Go find me online. I have my personal Instagram linked below. We also have an Instagram for this podcast that I recently started. I share all kinds of positivity, positive affirmations, and feel good things about writing and bookish stuff there. So go find that as well. And make sure you're following on all of our social media below. JJ Otis's social media is in the description box. And again, thank you so, so much for joining me today, JJ, and all of you guys listening. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Don't forget to find more joy in life. You are worth it. And as always, read books, be kind, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.